welcome to the EJF Learning Series. I hope everybody's staying warm out there. I'm your host, Sarah Keller, the Director of Community Management at EJF Real Estate. And today we have a special session for you, just for our DC clients, going over DC benchmarking requirements. Our speakers today are Michelle from Reserve Advisors, as well as Julian from Honeydew. This session is being recorded. A copy of the session will be provided after via email. After the presentation concludes, we will have time for a Q&A. So put your questions in the Q&A section. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Michelle. Michelle?
Thanks so much, Sarah. Sarah, really appreciate you organizing this, and thank you to everyone on the call for taking time out of your day to spend with us. Just a quick agenda so you know what we're going to cover today. Julian will be the lead on a majority of the content, first covering the basics of energy benchmarking, exactly what it is, next steps for you on how benchmarking will occur, and then BEPS, getting into the specific regulations in DC. So the BEPS basics, the BEPS action plans, and then BEPS next steps. So really drilling down on the specific needs for your community so that everyone's aligned on next steps and how to ensure compliance with the regulations. And then I'll cover energy audits, what they are and how they can help, and then how you can integrate energy services and reserve studies to ensure that funding is in place for some of your energy upgrades and needs. And then, as Sarah mentioned at the end, there will be time for Q&A. So we'll get things rolling, and I'll kick it over to Julian.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks again, Sarah, for setting this up. So let's talk about benchmarking. What is energy benchmarking? So one of the simplest ways to think about it is a way to score your building, kind of like on a report card, where it is understanding your energy usage, your building characteristics, and comparing your building's energy usage to other similar buildings. If you mind going to the next slide, Michelle. Now, as you can see here, as I mentioned, the report card, your main score, what we're going to call an Energy Star score, is essentially 1 through 100, right? And 100 being the most efficient, as you can see on the sliding scale on the bottom of this slide, with 1 being the least efficient. So if this were an example for your building, a 71, even though that's considered kind of like a C minus, is still a pretty decent score, right? And you'll understand a little bit more later on, if you don't mind continuing. Now, what does the benchmarking law, and actually this part's cut off on my end, but the most important thing here is to understand is from 2014, this has begun requiring buildings to benchmark and to submit their benchmarking reports. So in 2014, it was only for buildings that were above 50,000 square feet. Then later on in 2022, just recently, buildings above 25,000 square feet needed to start benchmarking. And when we're talking about the square footage here, we're not just talking about common area or just the units. We're talking about the entire building from the exterior walls, each floor, including the basement. And then this year, hence why we're giving this presentation, especially most of you, I believe, have buildings between 10 to 25,000 square feet. You are now required to submit your benchmarking report on an annual basis to DC. This all came from the Clean and Affordable Energy Act of 2008. And this essentially is helping DC reach their sustainability goals of being 100% run on renewables by 2042. And this is only the first step. Again, we're just scoring your building on an annual basis based on your efficiency compared to other similar buildings. Next slide, please. Now, when does this have to be completed? So since for many of you, this is the first time you're benchmarking, May 1st is the deadline to submit your report. If you do not submit your report by May 1st, after a few months, notice of infractions come out, and that's when penalties start coming out, which we'll get into a little further. Next slide, please.
I do want to just add that EJF and your community managers, which I've been doing it myself for my own clients, have been working since December to get the information together for those in the 10K category. Specifically because at the beginning, if this is your first year, there's actually a lot of information that needs to be gathered. And we want to ensure we have proper amount of time to avoid any penalties and fines.
Exactly. Thank you for that, Sarah. That is something that EJF and Honeydew have agreed upon to really start this early, to make sure we get it done early, and to make sure that there are zero penalties. And just so you know, we've been doing this for the past 6-7 years now for EJF, and we have not received a penalty since because of those efforts of starting earlier. So thank you for that, Sarah. Now, how is this done? So we are essentially collecting your building characteristics first, and that is what Sarah mentioned. So these questionnaires that we send to each of the managers have questions such as how big the building is, how many units, how many bedrooms, the percentage heated and cooled, is it master meter, so you only have one electric or gas meter in the building, or water meter, or are there separate meters for each of the residents, so on and so forth. Then we collect your past year's energy data. So for this year, we are only working with 2025 electric, gas, and water data, and your score is going to represent 2025's energy efficiency. So always think of the year prior when looking at your score. And again, this must be submitted to DOEE, which we do before May 1st every single year. And typically they come back with many questions, especially starting the second year of benchmarking, when they compare your energy usage. So if your energy usage dropped 20%, your gas usage, for example, they want to know why, right? And that is our responsibility. And sometimes we work with the managers to understand if anything's been done in the building or if that was simply due to weather patterns. Next slide, please. Now, who can do this? So the benchmarking process really can be done by anyone. So it could be done by yourself. It could be done by Honeydew, who is contracted with EJF. It could be done with reserve advisors. Essentially, the key here is it easy to do, right? And the reason why most communities hire a third-party firm to handle this for them is so that A, there are no errors in there, right? Because there's a lot of details included. Whenever there's an error, that could affect your score, either bringing your score down or up. And if it brings your score down with inaccurate data, then in the next steps, when we discuss BEPS, that could hurt you in the future, right? So you want to make sure that all of the data is as accurate as possible, and that it's done properly and on time to prevent any penalties or any issues further down the road when it comes to BEPS. Next slide, please.
Julian, how often have you been brought in by associations that maybe were self-managed and tried to do it themselves and ultimately spent a lot of time and energy and then ended up getting it professionally done? That's not uncommon, right?
It's actually very common. So there are a lot of, whenever there's a new set of buildings that are required to benchmark, there are buildings that say, we're going to attempt to do this ourselves. And then a few months down the road, or sometimes past the deadline, as Michelle said, they do come back and realize how much effort it takes. And just learning this program, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which really hasn't updated since the 90s, it's an outdated software and interface. It's not easy to really understand right away, right? So it takes time. And then again, you do not want to make any errors. But great question, Michelle. Thank you for that.
And
Just a
I was
little shout out for Honeydew too. They have a really great relationship with DOEE and have been able to work with them and coordinate with them. So when there are any errors or discrepancies in the data or they have any questions, it's just a much more streamlined process due to the volume that they do and that really great relationship. Sorry,
Thank
I'll kick it back to you.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And actually, to add to that real quick, for those in this chat who are interested in learning more about the BEPS program or have concerns specifically about the BEPS program because your building may be dealing with issues on complying with BEPS, right? And this could be in the future for many of the attendees here. But Honeydew has actually created a subcommittee under the DC BEPS task force, the task force that makes updates to the legislation, so that condo members, board members, residents, managers, attorneys representing community associations can all join this subcommittee and voice their concerns directly to one of the heads of DOEE, who then passes that on to the task force to potentially make changes. So we are setting these meetings. We actually have a meeting today. So if anybody here is interested, you can feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to send you an invite for this one or any future events as well. But it's a great way to get in front of the people writing the legislation and actually making a change, coming up with solutions to make this easier for community associations. But I'm going way too far down the road, so let me get back on track here. So what do you have to do? This part, as board members, residents of these buildings, you don't have to worry. You have an incredible management team who is answering all of the questions that we're sending. We have a questionnaire that lists questions from everything you see in front of you. And these managers are answering them, sending them back to us. We may come back with some questions here and there. But again, this is all being handled by EJF and your manager for your building. So you do not have to worry about that. Next slide, please. Now, there may be some people who, and there are, who have already approached us, who believe that their building is not 10,000 square feet, right? Or sometimes you may have a group of buildings in your community that in total don't add up to 10,000 square feet, or they have separate meters, separate equipment. They're completely separate, and each one is less than 10,000 square feet. In those scenarios, it is possible that we can exempt the building from benchmarking and BEPS altogether. So what we are doing for those instances is so that your community doesn't have to pay the full benchmarking fee and have to continue paying the benchmarking fee annually and even get into BEPS, right, which we'll get into soon. We can exempt you this year, not charge the full benchmarking fee, only charge an exemption fee, and then get your GFA measurement done to confirm that with DOEE, and then we just wait for their approval for the exemption at that point. So this may be the case for some buildings moving forward. Next slide, please. Now, once you have your benchmarking score, what's next, right? As I mentioned, benchmarking, remember, scoring your building annually. How efficient is your building compared to others, right? Similar buildings. If your score, and this score that you see in front of you, the 66 for multifamily, that is currently the threshold that will determine if you are subject or not subject to BEPS in cycle 1. BEPS has multiple cycles. There's cycle 1, which included only buildings above 50,000 square feet that are subject to BEPS. Cycle 2, which begins in 2028, is only for buildings that are 25,000 square feet and larger. And for the 10,000 square foot tranche and larger, they do not have to get into this whole BEPS scenario until 2032, which is cycle 3. So there's time, but it doesn't mean you can make efforts to try to improve your building first, right? So at that time, there will be a new threshold. We're not sure if there's a threshold for each tranche. 50,000 square feet and above get its own threshold. 25,000 to 50,000 gets its own, and then 10,000 to 25,000 get its own. We don't know that yet, right? And these are discussions that we're having in these subcommittee meetings that I mentioned before. I personally believe they should, but let's just say that the threshold is 66. If your Energy Star score is above a 66 or at a 66, you are not required to be subject to BEPS, right? Which is great news. You're efficient, you've cleared that hurdle. If it is below 66, you must take action. One first item that we usually recommend is doing an energy audit, understanding what improvements you can make in the building, how much it'll impact your score, how much it'll cost, how much it'll save, so on and so forth. And then that, again, will be talked about with Michelle later on. So I'm not going to get too much into detail there. But yeah, that's essentially the gist of what comes next. Next slide, please.
I do have a quick question, Julian. At what point should an association expect to actually get their energy score? 'Cause you said earlier that we have to have it filed by May. So like, what is the time frame of the scores being produced and sent out?
Great question. So for those buildings that are benchmarking for the first time, I would say to stay conservative, let's wait until May to get their final scores. Because we have to essentially set up their accounts. It takes longer. For buildings that we've benchmarked already in the past, and we're benchmarking again that year, that we may be able to get by February or March, depending on when we receive the December from the previous year's usage, right? So I would say if this is your first time benchmarking, let's say conservatively May, we may have it in March or April, but you for sure will receive your scores by May. If you've benchmarked before, and this is your second, third, whatever time benchmarking, then at that point, I would say February, March, the latest, you'll receive your scores.
Okay. And so since we start early, right? Because I know we've had plenty of conversations, getting things together for my own clients as well as for the managers in my team here. Because we started, we're not even waiting until May. We're not waiting for the last second. So we'll get the scores before they're even necessarily due, hopefully, for the first year.
That is correct. That is correct. And that is something that I can discuss with Rosie to see if we can send a group of scores that we have by March, right? Another group by April or May or something like that, right? So as we're completing everything and as all the data is inputted, right? Because that's out of our controls from the utility companies. And they're delayed by 2-3 months usually. Then I can discuss with her a plan, and we can work that with you, Sarah, on providing bulk scores so that you can share that with the managers and they can share that with their board members as well.
We'll talk more about that later. I just kind of wanted to ask so this way board members can kind of understand when they're going to get their score. Because I can imagine being a 10,000 square foot building and being like, oh no, this is our first time going through this. We might have to take action. We might have to start planning. So I think it's good for them to know that May timeframe is when most likely they will get it.
Yes. And typically what we do is buildings with lower scores we'll reach out to on an individual basis to the managers to kind of let them know that they're in a lower position and that it may not be a bad idea to begin the energy audit ahead of time, right? Before BEPS begins, right? And the goal here, if your cycle for BEPS doesn't begin until 28 or 32, the whole goal is to not be subject to BEPS. And you can ask many managers at EJF, it is a nightmare once you're subject to BEPS. You're stuck, you have to make the improvements, and the penalties are wild, which we'll get to next. So we typically will reach out to the buildings specifically that we think are not in a good position to work ahead of time to possibly even not be subject to BEPS in the future.
Okay, thank you.
So this is for, I mean, we've pretty much covered everything here. The entire point of BEPS, again, is to make sure that we're making buildings more efficient. And as you're making buildings more efficient and using less energy, it's easier to reach the 100% renewable goals, right? Now, if you are subject to BEPS, you have different pathways to choose from, right? There's a total of 4, but the 3 main ones are here. Performance pathway, simple. You're reducing your total energy usage by 20%. How do you measure that? Not to get confusing here, but you remember I mentioned the Energy Star score, 1 through 100, 100 being the most efficient, 1 being the least efficient. There are other metrics in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, the tool we use to benchmark. And one of those metrics, which we use for the performance pathway, is called Site EUI, Energy Usage Intensity. And that's simply total electric, total gas usage divided by your square footage. So it's your energy usage per square foot. And if you are subject to BEPS and you choose this pathway, you are saying, I'm going to reduce my site EUI, or my total energy per square foot, by 20% over the 5-year cycle. This is typically for buildings that have a lower score and cannot meet the next pathway, standard target pathway, which is the easiest to understand. If you are below a 66, again, we're using that as the standard score, get to the 66 by the 5th year, right? Super simple. Get your Energy Star score up. And then lastly, the prescriptive pathway. This one's a bit more complicated. You're working with DOEE, you're setting up an agreement with them, where first you get your energy audit done, right? Like through reserve advisors. Then you come up with the list of projects that you will comply with that will reach a total of 25% total savings. You agree on those projects with DOEE. And from there, all you need to do is you need to implement all of those projects. If it doesn't provide the full 25% savings, doesn't matter. You've complied as long as you've implemented all of those projects, right? It's a bit more work. You usually have to aim to save more than the 20% from the performance pathway, but as long as you implement them, you're guaranteed compliance. Next slide, please. And for the 4th pathway, this we call the alternative compliance pathway, which really means come to DOEE and give them an idea of how you can comply that doesn't fit any of the other pathways, but you think DOEE will approve, right? So it's more of a custom approach. And as one of these alternative compliance pathways, you have the extended deep energy retrofit. This was originally only for low-income buildings, but after some advocacy, we were able to include this for condos and co-ops as well now. So what does this mean? Let's say that you either are in the beginning of the cycle for BEPS, you do not know, you don't have enough time to implement the projects to get to the 66 or to reduce the 20% over the 5 years, or you're at the end of the cycle, you haven't done anything, you're like, shoot, we got to comply or else we get a $800,000 penalty, right? As an 80,000 square foot building. Okay, let's apply for EDER. Let's extend our deadline for when we need to do this into the following cycle. But now we have a higher goal to meet. Instead of 20%, and this depends on your distance from BEPS, from your baseline, it could be 30 or 40% that you need to save now over 2 cycles. So this is great for buildings, especially in cycle 1, that couldn't improve their score. They're now in the evaluation year. They do not want to get penalized. So now they're going to extend their deadline by applying for extended deep energy retrofit. Again, it's a lot more work, a lot more investment into implementing energy conservation measures into your building because you're implementing more for more savings. but it's giving you, instead of a 5-year cycle, a 10-year cycle to implement all those. So yeah, next slide, please. Now, what if you don't do anything? We get this a lot. And in the beginning, in 2014, DOE was a lot more flexible, right? But until I'd say around 2018, 2019, they started penalizing buildings almost right away after not complying. These penalties for benchmarking are $10 per square foot, $100, no, sorry, blah, blah, blah. $100 per day of non-compliance. We've seen penalties up to $50,000 for not having complied for multiple years, right? And what we've seen in those notices was that it was about $10,000 per year. Now, for those buildings that came to us with those notices, we were able to drop that penalty by a lot, but they still had to pay a penalty. So, as you see here, typically most of the penalties for not complying within a year is about $500 to $2,000. That's usually sent in the fall after not complying. Depending if you didn't receive the letter, if you weren't aware of this, it can be lowered, but there are penalties for not complying with benchmarking. As for BEPS, that's where the big penalties come. It is $10 per square foot of your square footage of the building, right? Reduced down to the nearest 100,000. So let's say it is a 120,000 square foot building. That would be $1 million penalty, or $1.2 million penalty, actually. If you are a 10,000 square foot building, that is a $100,000 penalty. So BEPS is important. You do not want to be subject to BEPS. So do whatever you can now to make improvements to the building, improve your score to make sure that you are not going to be subject to BEPS. And I would say keep your scores in the 70s. That's the goal. 60s is in the risky territory. 70s, you should be in the clear. Next slide, please. Now, how long do we have to meet BEPS requirements? For each cycle, they last about 5 years, with the first cycle being right after COVID hit. So due to COVID, they added an extra year, so 6 years in the first cycle. But typically, it's 5 years. The next cycle begins 2028. The baseline score that will determine if you are subject to BEPS or not may be 2026, or most likely 2027 score using 2026 data. So, and the baseline is what determines if you are subject to BEPS, right? That is a score they look at. Is it below or above 66, or whatever the new threshold is? If it's below, subject to BEPS, no matter where your score goes after, right? So I would say for buildings 25,000 square feet and above, do everything you can this year to make improvements, because next year's score could be the baseline that determines your if you're subject or not. And then for 10,000 square feet, you have some time, but the earlier you work on it, the better, and less headache later down the road. Next slide, please.
Great. I can pick it up here.
Michelle.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julian.
Yeah.
This is a perfect segue with the timing of all this. As Julian mentioned, it's looking at prior year energy usage when you're getting the current year score. So this time goes by very, very quickly. And so if you have any indication that you are under or really close to the score of 66, it's a really good idea to get ahead of this, because these decisions are big, it costs a lot of money, and it takes time, right? So if your score is kind of on the bubble or even slightly above, you might want to consider an energy audit. There are two main levels of energy audit, a level 1, which is a less robust audit, and then a level 2. So this chart summarizes the differences, but I don't know about you, I'm a little more visual, and so just wanted to provide kind of quick snapshots of what a level 1 and level 2 look like to talk through it. So a level 1 is fairly high level, where it is going to give a full audit of your building, areas for energy improvement, but the actual savings are more low, medium, high, right? So it'll say you can do X and there's a relatively low improvement and low cost, or maybe it's a high improvement and low cost, right? So it gives you an idea on those most efficient projects to take on, and any potential incentives. So if there are energy rebates and incentives that are offered, it'll give you some insight there. So this is great for those that are in the more exploratory phase. But in actuality, if your score really is on that bubble or you're under, you're going to need to know what you truly need to do and the impacts of that to your score, which is a level 2. So you can see this is the same kind of inventory, but instead of saying kind of low, medium, high, it gives the calculations for how it would move the needle on your energy score. So in this example, if we just pull one out, installing low flow shower heads moves the score from 78 to 80. So that potentially will get you an increase of 2. But now when you have this audit, you have to then decide, right, which projects are most efficient, which ones do we want to tackle? How are we going to get the funds to do that? We're going to need to get proposals for it. So it is, as you know, it's like any other project, a very involved and timely undertaking. So that's why we recommend getting these audits as soon as possible to give yourself time to really wrap your heads around where you're going to focus, get those bids, execute that work, let those systems play out for a whole year so it can then be captured in your following year score. So a lot of moving pieces here, and the sooner you start, the better. This is just another snapshot of that level 2 where it is showing some of those energy savings as well. So of course it costs money to install these projects, and you can recoup some of that, not only on your score, right, but on your actual energy usage. That does translate to your bill, right? So how quickly, what's the payback period for some of these projects? So we mentioned these sometimes need to be moved ahead of schedule, right? Ideally, associations have a reserve study, which is that capital planning tool. So evaluating all of your common infrastructure at your building. So whether it's your roof, your elevator, your lobby, and everything in between, everything will have a projected useful life and replacement timing and cost. But that reserve study assumes that you are going to get the full life out of it. So using the example of a boiler, maybe it has another 15 years of life or 10 years of life, but due to the energy savings and your need to improve your energy score, you decide to accelerate that project ahead of schedule, right? You need to make sure that your reserve funding strategy and your energy goals are aligned. So it is important to make sure that they're integrated. They don't have to be done by the same firm. If you have someone that prepares the audit, I would just make sure once you decide which projects you're going to undertake, that that is provided to your reserve specialist to be incorporated in the reserve study. So here's an example, just to kind of show an example of this playing out. Here's the static reserve study. It was prepared. Then an energy audit was performed. So here is the needs at the time of the association. And you can see this, what this graph is. Essentially, the blue line is the reserve balance. Those red bars are the reserve expenditures, and the green bars are the contributions. So as you know, the goal of reserves is to stabilize that reserve contribution, knowing there's going to be years where you're contributing more than you're spending, and then years where you're spending much more than you're contributing, to really just help stabilize the budget, right? To allow for these fluctuations in prices or expenditures without having to go to like special assessments or loans. But as you decide to move up that boiler, what does that do to your funding strategy, right? If you just decide to accelerate that project, well, now you're in the deficit, right? Because the funds weren't accumulated in time. But you can work with your reserve specialist to get creative with this, right? Maybe we can defer certain projects that are a little more discretionary, like the hallway carpet and the painting of the hallways. Sure, we want the building to look beautiful, but that's a nice to have, not a must, right? So you can work with your reserve specialist to come up with a strategy that really works for your community. And you can see here by shuffling those projects around, they now stay in the green and can afford to accelerate the boiler project without having to do a massive increase to the assessments or a special assessment or a loan.
I always like to think about this as like a strategic plan. Because
Yep.
it maps it out and also it makes it easier for boards to make these decisions when you have the data. Because it can be I attend a lot of board meetings and I have in previous years. And these are always tough conversations to have. So by being like, this is what the professionals say, and this is based off of data and the conditions of our building, it makes it so much easier for boards to be like, look, this is what it is. This is the reality of the situation. You've done your due diligence by hiring a professional that specializes in um, reserve studies and energy audits, and kind of guides you. It's like, you go to your attorney for advice on legal situations. It's kind of the same concept here, right? We go to our energy provider, or energy advisor for advice on how to handle these things. We go to our reserve specialist on advice on how to proceed through these things. So I just want to highlight that if that helps reframe things.
And to add to that real quick, not many people know your building more than the person who's doing your reserve studies. And when you hire just a third-party energy auditor who's coming to the building for the first time, they may miss things that your reserve study company, reserve advisors, wouldn't miss because they're very familiar and they come on site every 5 years. I don't know how often it is. But from our experience, energy audits from a reserve study company like Reserve Advisors is definitely the way to go.
Jillian, and there's a lot of collaboration that honestly goes on behind the scenes, of course, with you in mind and as much a part of the conversation as you want to be, because you ultimately are the key stakeholder, right? It's your home. But we are often coordinating with management, with Julian, just to make sure we're all aligned on this. Here's the audit. Julian works really closely to help associations with getting that score in compliance and in making sure DOEE is comfortable with everything. And then when that's all squared away, provided back and updated into the reserve study. So a lot of collaboration. You can't have one person that's an expert in everything, right? So bring in the various professionals to all work together. And then for those of you that maybe are lucky enough to have a really high score and aren't necessarily subject to BEPS, you're in compliance, maybe it's a new building or you've done previous improvements. There is what we call, it's a condensed option that we have. It's called an energy snapshot. It's not really standard. The level 1 and level 2 audits are official audits. Like if you went out to get 3 proposals, that's an actual formal service. There's standards around it. So you would have a standardized audit. This energy snapshot is something that we created as an add-on to a reserve study where it will just give you similar to a level 1, kind of the low, medium, high, and some rough potential savings. And it's just around a couple key components. So it's certainly not as extensive as a full level 1 audit, but it'll give you kind of a rough idea. Hey, we anticipate you can save about X annually in energy savings, and this is a few ways to do that. So these are very, very cheap. It's under $1,000 and really intended to just be kind of coordinated with your reserve study, things to consider. And then potentially, as you decide to perform various energy upgrades, again, that gets worked back into the reserve study. So the snapshot truly is just that. It's going to give you a kind of a building score to analyze your overall building health and potential areas for improvement. So just a really quick recap there on the audits and energy improvements. Level 2 is really the best way to identify areas to achieve those targets. If you're not in compliance, you're really going to have to go the level 2 route. Really important to think about not just the cost of these projects, right? But the penalties, weigh them against the penalties of not complying. It really is, as Julia mentioned, super serious, something they're not taking lightly. And even if your score is well above the requirement, you might still want to consider an audit or at least a snapshot to have an understanding of potentially energy improvements, which of course impact your budget, right? If you can bring those energy savings to your building, decrease that energy bill, you will recoup some of those costs over time.
Yeah. Energy costs have been crazy. As I'm sure, we just came through budget season. And the last few years have been quite hefty for Pepco as well as Washington Gas. And we don't foresee that leveling out anytime soon. I don't know, Julian, if you have anything to add to that, but is there light at the end of the tunnel with energy increases? You're on mute. It's okay.
You're referring to rates, energy rates?
Energy rates, yeah.
Yeah, no, they are actually going up again in June, unfortunately. A lot of this is due to, I'm sure all of you are aware, AI data centers, right, being built all throughout the Mid-Atlantic. And they are requiring a lot of energy, and we are not building new power plants. So until these states, right, because we don't have really any data centers in DC that I know of, require these data centers and the companies running them to supply their own energy, right? Build their own power plants as they're building their data centers. Until then, rates may still continue to rise, right? But hopefully there is action being taken at the moment to stop that. And it's not just here, it's all over the country. Rates are increasing at a significant rate, so 30, sometimes 60%. So that alone is motivation to help reduce your energy usage, because you definitely see that increase in your bills, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know it was a little side path
Yeah,
there,
no, it's all good.
all right, let's open it up to Q&A. And we'll go one by one here. So this is a good first question. Efficiency units. So no bedroom. Is it counted as having one bedroom or no bedrooms?
That would count as a one bedroom.
It would count as a one bedroom. Okay. Next, my building is greater than 10,000 square feet in total, but the units are separately metered for electricity and gas, but not watered. Are we required to report?
Yes. So the square footage or being required to report doesn't matter whether you are separately metered or master metered, 1 meter for the entire building. It's really based on the size of the building from the exterior walls, including all the units, the common areas, the basement, and sometimes even the penthouse up top.
This question has more so to do with it's kind of similar along the same vein, calculating energy uses for the buildings if the units are independently metered. If only managing common spaces, are you benchmarking total usage of all units or just the common spaces?
Total usage of all units. What we do is we collect, if it's separately metered, we collect all the meters through photos. We submit that through the utility portals, and then we collect the aggregate usage data. And for privacy issues, we can't collect individual usage from any of the units, right? It has to be aggregate usage of all the meters combined. And then we input that into Energy Star Portfolio Manager each year.
Is water a factor?
So water is required. However, your water usage really doesn't affect your score, except And Michelle mentioned this as one of the line items in the energy audit report, hot water, right? So with the shower heads. So hot water, you use electricity or gas to heat that water. So energy is used for that. So if you're using less hot water, you're using less energy. But outside of that, we still input your or upload your water data every year. It just doesn't have an effect. And we're asking DOE why we have to do that every year. Doesn't make any sense.
Maybe it's future plans.
I think it's future plans. We keep asking, they're like, oh yeah, no future plans. We're like, oh shit.
Sure you do. The average, if you're ever on hold with DC Water, the hold music says like the average age of a water main in the city is 77 years. So
What?
a little fun fact for everybody.
That's
Um,
hilarious.
so it's something I will never get out of my brain,
Been on there too often.
especially this week.
Yeah.
So along the lines of the score, so we get a single score for all of the utility, gas and the electric are driving that score. Is there any breakout to determine a breakout that would say like, okay, gas is the problem versus electric, so they can make
That's a
decisions.
Michelle question. That's actually in the energy audit. So the benchmarking report or the software we use to benchmark will separate out your usage, but it doesn't say, oh, your gas usage is the problem, right? Because all buildings are different. Some buildings don't use any gas, right? Other buildings use gas for heating, water heating, cooking, almost everything you can use gas for. And their gas usage may seem high in the report, but it doesn't mean that that is the culprit of why your score is low. So that is when you go through an energy audit, and that's when reserve advisors would be able to determine what is the culprit, electric or gas.
Yeah. Okay. One of my favorite topics. So we have a building considering adding solar panels. Does this factor into BEPS? We have a building built in the 1920s and not have been able to lower our energy usage.
Great question. So for Energy Star score, yes, solar does help. It increases your score anywhere between a point, and then we've seen it up to 15 points for other buildings, right? So it all depends on the size of the system and your total energy usage. So the percentage it's offsetting. Then when it comes to the other metric I mentioned earlier, site EUI, energy usage intensity, again, total energy usage divided by the total square feet of your building, that is not affected by solar. So if you are on the performance pathway trying to reduce your site EUI by 20%, it will not affect that, unfortunately, but it will help your Energy Star score increase so that in a future cycle, when you're on the standard target pathway to get out of BEPS completely, then that's when it will benefit. So it may not benefit in this cycle, but it can benefit in the future. One thing to keep in mind, tax credits are going away for solar. So if you are interested in solar, move forward as quickly as possible, because then your offers, if you're looking at a financed offer, a power purchase agreement, or a roof lease, will change significantly once that 30% tax credit goes away. And all solar companies have different deadlines on when they need a contract signed to safe harbor the 30% tax credit. So definitely talk to them about it for deadlines. Now, one other item I forgot to mention before, and thank you, Rosie, for bringing it up. Aside in the chat. A lot of buildings that are 10,000 square feet have less than 20 units. If you have less than 20 units, it will not create an Energy Star score. It cannot. It gives you instead a source EUI. We talked about site EUI. Now we're talking about source EUI. Similar to site EUI, but here's the difference between site and source. Site looks at your energy usage on site, regardless where it's coming from. If it's coming from solar, if it's coming from the grid, it doesn't count. It doesn't care. It's using your total energy usage divided by your square feet, right? And that's why solar doesn't impact your site EUI. Source, on the other hand, will be impacted by solar because it's accounting for where the energy is coming from. So if you cannot generate an Energy Star score, but you can generate a source EUI instead, that will determine you're subject to BEPS or not, then it will affect that score. So I hope that didn't confuse people more than actually answering the question. I just wanted to provide all the details here.
A rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I do want to just share that Honeydew is happy to work with you on solar panel projects. I've done like three, I think, with Honeydew over the course of I don't know how long at this point. And it's a very smooth process, and they'll walk you through step by step because it can be quite complicated. And it does take a while, but starting sooner rather than later is best, as Jillian mentioned, with the safe harbor credits going away. All right. This is one of my favorite topics as well. Elevators. So can't limit people using it, but how can you control how much power the elevator is pulling?
That is a great question. I'm not as familiar with elevator efficiency. Michelle, do you happen to know if there's anything they can add to the equipment to almost like a VFD, but on the elevator side, right? That can help improve the efficiency?
It's a great question. And I'll have to ask our energy team, and I'll shoot that over to you, Sarah. So when we send the recap out, we can send a little blurb about it.
Yeah, that is a great question, though. I never even thought of that. Usually, I would assume if it's a very old elevator, right, you'd have to replace it, which is not cheap. But other than that, I can't think of anything or have remember seeing anything in energy audits, but I could be wrong. So we'll wait on Michelle's team to see if there's a solution for that.
Yeah. Most of the time when I'm doing a modernization for an elevator, because I've had the pleasure of going through that process, or thinking about doing, because you don't always replace an entire elevator at the same time. You do different parts. So working with your elevator provider, whoever it is, Otis, Warfield, Sanford, so on and so forth, they actually have special consultants that'll come out and examine your elevator to determine what you should replace, when you should replace it. And I do believe part of that might include energy efficiency, or at least it should. And they would probably be a better person to speak with directly about that because it's very specific. Whereas reserve advisors and our reserve specialist friends, they're providing just general pricing, typically in reserve studies, on how much it's going to cost. But then you kind of go to a specialist, right? You go to another specialist, which is an elevator company, to unpack some of those things and those options. That helps. So if you have an elevator and you think it's consuming a lot of electricity, maybe have your manager reach out to the elevator company to start some sort of assessment directly with them, would be my advice. But I would also be curious to know what you find.
Yes, me
We
too.
continue.
Yeah. Okay. We still have 5 minutes. Great. We are a co-op consisting of 15 single-family houses. We have a master water meter, but all other utilities are managed by individual owners. The HOA has no control over appliances, insulation, or any other energy utilization in the home. Are we exempt?
Did you say townhomes?
They said single-family homes.
Single family homes, all sharing a water meter. So technically, based on the rules, you have to aggregate the square footage of all of the buildings or homes that are connected to the water meter. However, I believe they are possibly already working with our team on this, and our team is pretty proactive when it comes to being able to exempt buildings. So I can check with Rosie. I remember her mentioning something like that in the past of a building like that, and there may be a few like that in EJF. But typically, the rule is as long as they're sharing meters, then you have to get the total of the square foot of every building that is sharing that meter, whether it's a home or not. There are other jurisdictions that do exempt single family homes and row home or townhomes, right? But I'm not sure if that is the case in DC. So we're gonna have to double check that and get you an answer for that, Sarah. Regarding the association not being able to make improvements inside the units or inside the homes, that is actually an issue that all community associations are currently facing right now, especially ones that have a lot of the equipment within the individual units of these buildings, where the board does not have any power over the unit owners to have them replace that equipment. So this is a topic that we're discussing right now in the subcommittee that I'm about to be in again at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock, I forgot when. And that I would advise whoever's asking that question to also join to help voice your concerns and come up with a solution to this, to possibly exempt single family homes and townhomes that share meters, right? Or at least get DOEE's opinion on that. So yeah, that would be my answer. And I would get back to you again to be continued regarding the single family homes. I'll get with Rosie on the side for that.
Thank you. I also just want to add, with condos and cooperatives, the board does have some power in setting standards, but it would depend on how your governing documents are written as far as the extent of what you can do. But I have heard of buildings that have required each owner to replace their hot water heaters after 10 years because, as some of you may know, they tend to fail and then they explode and leak. And so it could be along the same vein, but that's more of a legal question on like what options and powers you have regarding this. All right. Another great one, especially since DC has a lot of commercial spaces and residential mixed unit buildings. So they have a restaurant on the first floor that's not associated in the building in any way. They own their own property, including a different address. How would this be addressed?
Great question. First, it's a restaurant. So first thing we check, is it separately metered? Is it sharing any equipment with the building? If the answer to the separately metered is yes, and sharing equipment with the building like HVAC unit, a boiler, something like that is no, then we can remove that restaurant. Restaurants are one of these space types that are exempt from this, including gyms, spas. For some reason, I can't think of the others right now. But there are other space types that can also be exempt. So for a restaurant, if they are separately metered and not sharing any equipment with the building, we can remove them from the benchmarking report. If they are not separately metered, then unfortunately we have to include them. And we would advise that they do sub-meter so that in the future we can remove them. If they are a space type that cannot be exempt, like a bank, for example, then we have to include them, and we work with your manager to get their contact info, or the manager reaches out to them if they have a relationship already to gather the data for us to enter into the benchmarking report. There are instances where we go to BEPS and one of the retail spaces are causing the score to be very low. And in those cases, we try any way we can to exempt them, or you would have to figure out an agreement with the other entity, either if there's a master association in the building or not, that if you get penalized and they're not doing anything on their part, that the far majority of the penalty will go on them. So these are other discussions we're having in these subcommittee meetings under the task force. So again, if anybody's interested in learning more about that, reach out to me and I'm happy to add you as an invite. I'll send you an invite to these meetings.
Great, thank you. One last question, and then we're going to conclude. Can the board get individual unit meter data to see which units are particularly problematic?
That is where sub-metering comes into place. Again, I mentioned previously that there are privacy issues for a benchmarking company that's not associated with the building to gather individual usage. So I would say either sub-metering to understand that. But if it's already separately metered, it's hard to ask units for their bills to kind of compare. So that's a bit of a harder one to answer, because it also depends on the building. If they're master metered, you sub-meter the building, then you will be able to see that. Now, I just realized in DC, multifamily buildings are not allowed to sub-meter and charge back. That is another issue that we're working on, actually, with CAI's lobbyists to make it legal only for community associations. We don't care about the rest of the multifamily buildings, because there are a lot of master metered buildings that would like to sub-meter so that everybody's responsible for their own energy usage, but at the moment they can't. So that's something that we're working on. Again, too many details. I apologize for that, but hopefully I answer the question partially.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say probably legal advice on that for the individual Pepco meter data. But I do want to clarify that buildings in DC can sub-meter for water, because DC Water likes to put just one water meter. A lot of newer construction will have sub-meters within all the individual units, and normally it's facilitated via a third party. I know I have a community that I work with that has all the individual units sub-metered. But even if all the individual units aren't sub-meters, if you have a commercial unit, a lot of them have sub-meters, which is extremely helpful because restaurants love using water.
Yes, they do. And
So,
gas.
oh yes, gas. All right. Well, thank you all for taking the time out of your busy day. I do appreciate it, and your dedication to your communities is admirable. So, I will be sending out this recording. And Julian, please share that subcommittee information so I can include it so everyone has it, if they choose to participate. And thank you, Michelle, for everything.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone's time. Hope everyone has a wonderful day, and good luck in that meeting, Julian.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Appreciate
fighting
it.
a good fight for us.
Yes, definitely. Well, we're trying.
Okay.
Thank
Well
you all.
done.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Michelle. This was it's actually really fun.
Bye.
Bye.